Hello everyone, we are back with another episode of Computer Vision Talks, and today we are going to talk about self-supervised few-shot learning on point clouds, which was a paper at NeurIPS 2020 by Charu. And Charu is a PhD candidate in the Department of CSE at IIT Hyderabad. Her research interests include geometric machine learning, point cloud data, graph structured data, assignment problems, optimal transport, omnidirectional images. That's a lot of research interest, and we look forward to the talk today. Welcome, Charu. Please go ahead.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Shambhavi, for the kind introduction. Yeah, so I'll just move on to the slides. So hi everyone. My name is Charu Sharma. I'm a PhD student. She has already told about this. So this work I'm going to present is from NeurIPS 2020. That is self-supervised few shot learning on point clouds. So this is a joint work with my PhD supervisor, Manohar Kaur. So in the presentation, I'm going to first start with what is a point cloud, just to give you the idea for those who don't know about this. So then I will actually explain like what is the task which we are going to perform, what are the different tasks. Then I'll move on to what are the existing work in this area, in the point cloud area, and then I will explain what is our method, what we did, what was our contribution, and then the results from our paper, and finally I would summarize my presentation. So I'm going to start with what is a point cloud. So point cloud is basically a set of points in a three-dimensional space. So it is, we can say that it is a set of points in d-dimensional space, but this d is typically being set to 3. So we can have higher values of d, that means we can have colors or surface normal, but typically it is being set to 3, and we are also considering three-dimensional point clouds in our work. So in the first figure, you can see that this kettle is being shown in a three-dimensional space. So there is a single object. Then in the middle figure, you can see that we have point cloud of a street view. So these kind of point clouds are being taken from you can say laser or 3D scanners, which are generally placed on the vehicles or the cars. Then we have the third image, because generally, like I said, that point clouds are generally produced by lidar or 3D scanners. So you can just imagine that we have a lidar or 3D scanner here, and this scanner is able to actually cover a very large area, very large field. So it is giving a very large field of view. So these kind of point clouds are really huge in real. So this was about the LiDAR scanners, and there are some properties of point clouds, like they are irregular, unstructured, and unordered. So by irregular, we mean that the spread of the point in the point cloud in subfigure A is not uniform. So we have sparse as well as dense regions. By unstructured, we mean that there is no grid-like structure, like we have grids in images. We have 2D grid in images, but we don't have any grid here. And distance from a point to its neighbors, they are not fixed. They would also vary. By unordered, we mean that as a set, these points are invariant to permutation. For example, in the first in the subfigure C, we can see that if this red point is being placed at position 1 in the matrix or in the order, or if we place it onto the fourth position, it won't make any difference. So in general, I would say we need the network which should be able to learn the embeddings, so that the embeddings would be invariant to permutation. So this was about the point cloud. Now, what is the task which we are going to perform? So for a point cloud, for a three-dimensional point cloud, embedding a point cloud is to map a point cloud to a d-dimensional space, such that we have now initially it was in three-dimensional space, now it is in d-dimensional space. So basically we are actually projecting a three-dimensional point cloud to a feature space. Now what we want semantically similar parts of the objects to be close to each other in the feature space. Now what is the meaning of this line? So just see that we have an aeroplane here. So we can see that the middle part of the aeroplane is being shown in green, and both the wings of the aeroplane are being shown with the same color. Maybe we say it's a violet or it's a blue. So why are they of same color? Because both the wings represents the same meaning. They are telling us that both of them are wings and their meaning is same. So they are semantically similar parts. So what we want is we want the embeddings for these points for the wings to be close to each other in the feature space. So you can imagine that in 3D space, both the wings are far from each other, but they should be closer in the feature space. So that's the main goal. Now, considering this goal, we have three downstream tasks which we perform. So first is classification, then part segmentation, and then we have semantic segmentation. So just to give you the idea, what is a classification in terms of the point cloud? So we have label associated with each point cloud, and this label y is being taken from a set from one of the k classes, and our model would output k scores for all of these k classes, and we would actually pick the maximum, the class with the maximum score. So you can just imagine that we have a table point cloud here, and it is being fed to some sample network, and in the end this network should be able to learn the embedding in such a way that it should be able to classify this as a table. So this was the classification. Now about the part segmentation, we have label associated with each point in the point cloud. So in classification we have label for each point cloud, and in segmentation we have each label for each point in the point cloud. For example, in the earphones here, so you can see that both the earbuds of this headphone are of same color, that is yellow. So we can say that they are of same label, and the headband is of different color, and even the wire is of different color. So we want label for each point in the point cloud. So our model would output n by m scores, where n is the number of points in the point cloud and m would be the number of part categories, like earbuds of the headphone or wings of the aeroplane, etc. Then we also have semantic segmentation, in which we consider some kind of a scene like outdoor or indoor scene. And for example, in this outdoor scene, we can see that we have cars, and even if the cars are of different color and of different sizes, they are being segmented with the same color in the output, because they belong to the same category. So here again we have n by m scores, but here m are the semantic subcategories like car or trees in the scene. So this was about the segmentation task. Now, what are the existing work in this area? So most of the work in this point cloud processing area are based on supervised or unsupervised methods. So initially, the methods which came, they used to consider images or multiple view of the point cloud from different angles. So what they would do is they would rotate the point cloud, or they would, like, the orientation would be changed, and they would take the picture from different vantage points, and they would consider all of these views of the point cloud in the network. For example, in subfigure A, I have mentioned that there's a multi-view CNN which used to consider different views of the point cloud. Then there are so many point cloud networks which used to convert the raw point cloud into a voxel grid. So voxel grid is basically a 3D grid. You can see in the first figure, in the top figure, that a bunny is being placed inside a 3D 3 dimensional grid. So like I said, that point cloud is not a regular data, like it's an unstructured data, there is no grid. So now what we are doing is we are converting this irregular data into a regular one by placing a point cloud into a voxel grid. So if we place it into a voxel grid, it's a 3D grid now. So in the 3D grid, if a point is present in that voxel, then the voxel would be set to 1, like on the right. In the top figure, you can see on the right side that the voxels are 1, and the ones which are empty are being set to 0. So many of these used to convert this point cloud to a voxel grid. Then there came some method which started processing point clouds directly, like raw point clouds, and they would also construct some kind of graph inside the network. Like they would, like in this subfigure B, you can see that we connect the xi to its neighbors. So then they apply convolution. So this method came in 2019, which is called edgeconv, and they would give some kind of a weightage to its neighbors. So all of these were supervised. Then most of the unsupervised networks which came are based on mainly autoencoders and GANs. So I'm not going into the detail of that, but they would use reconstruction laws like Camphor distance or earth mover distances to get the reconstruction of the point cloud. So this was about the existing work. Now, how does the learning happen in the layers? So this is one example from this DGCNN network, which came in 2019. So this is generally the case from supervised network. Like you can see that we have 3 rows. That means we have 3 examples, and each column represents input, layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3 output. So how can we read this example? So you can just imagine that we have this red point on a aeroplane. So you can see first row and first figure. So we have red point on the aeroplane, middle part of the aeroplane, and here we compute the distance from this red point to every other point in the point cloud. Now here the yellow represents the near and blue represents the far. So in the first column, you can see that in the 3D inputs in the 3D input space, all the yellow would be near to this red point because they are close to the red point, and far is blue. Now, as we go into the layers, and we see that both the wings are getting blue. That means they are getting close to each other and they are getting far from this red point, which is present on the middle part of the aeroplane. That means this is doing what we want. Like we want semantically similar parts to be close to each other. So this is what is happening in the layers, and this is the same thing which is being there in example 2 and example 3. So we have both the wings which are getting close to each other in the third row, and we have both the what we call it. So I don't get the name, but yeah. So both of these, both the similar parts are getting close to each other. So then we can perform the segmentation. So this is how the learning happen in the layers. Now there was only one work which was based on self-supervised method when I was working on this paper. So this work, what they usually do, it came in 2019, NeurIPS 2019. So what they do is they would first convert a point cloud to a voxel grid, and then they would consider their voxel ID as their self-supervised label, and then they would randomly displace the parts of the aeroplane, like in the figures in the second figure, and they would try to reconstruct these parts onto their original location using those voxel ID as self-supervised label. So this was the idea behind this work, and they would convert a point cloud to a voxel grid. And but yeah, so many of the work used to consider a lot of point clouds for training. So now, in general, what were the challenges? So some challenges are raw point clouds conversion to voxel grid. That adds a lot of additional memory. And then it would also add some kind of quantization artifact. So quantization artifact is basically when we convert a continuous value to a discrete one. So here in this point cloud, you can see that when we convert it into a discrete, it would be like this. So there is no smoothness anymore in this one, and it's like a voxel, like we have integer values. And then supervised methods, they suffer from the manual annotation of point cloud data, and many of these networks consider a lot of point clouds for training. So that's also expensive. So these were the challenges, and considering this, we were thinking to use self-supervised learning in our method. And so self-supervised learning, just to give you the idea that we can generate labels from data itself, and we don't use the label data in this. And these labels can be generated either from some kind of a neighborhood or maybe relation between the point clouds or points in the point clouds, and that's how we generate the labels. And why do we use self-supervision? Because we can use unlabeled data. There are a lot of unlabeled data already there on Facebook, like images are there on YouTube, we have videos. So we don't need so much of labeled data for if we use self-supervision. And so this reduces the burden of annotation of data, and some of the areas are actually supervision staff, like especially medical area is supervision staff. So we can use these kind of method in those areas. So in this figure, you can see that we have first a data set with no labels, and we have a lot of images here. Even in the figure, it is being shown. So we train a method using a pretext task. So this self-supervised task, we call it pretext task. And once this first network is trained, we can transfer this knowledge to the downstream network. So this downstream network is a supervised network. But as being shown in this image, the label data is not that much. Like the number of samples we use here would be lesser than the one which we are using in the self supervision, and that's how we can improve the performance of the downstream task. So this was the idea behind self supervision. Now we thought of using few short learning in those, so that we can use only few samples, because there was no existing work on few short learning on point clouds, and most of the work used to consider a lot of point clouds for the training. So few short learning is basically referred to as M short K prime way learning, where K prime are the randomly sampled classes from a set of K classes, and M is the number of samples for each of these K prime classes. So in this figure, you can see that we have a support set and we have a query set. So by support set, we train the network, and the query set is definitely the unseen samples. And these are quite also small. The support set is also small, and finally we learn the network using only few samples. So this was the motivation behind using self-supervised and few short learning. Now I'm moving on to our method. But before explaining our method, I would like to explain what is a cover tree, because we use this in our method. So cover tree is basically a space partitioning algorithm which was generally introduced to speed up the k nearest neighbor search. So to define what is a cover tree, before that I would like to define what is a ball. So suppose we have a set of points P, and to define a ball is a closed L2 ball centered at point C with a radius. So here I'm saying 2 raised power I is a radius at level I in the cover tree. Now if we have a ball with some radius and center C, now I would say I want to cover all the points in the set of in the set P. So we have to construct union of balls. So we need more balls to cover all the points in a set. So that so we say this as a cover. So we say that union of balls is a cover for a set of points. Now considering this cover tree is a level tree where each level is a cover for its lower level. So for example, we can see that we have a root node here, and in the first figure. So I'm not sure whether all of you can see my cursor, but I'm just trying to explain using my cursor. So this is a root node, and we have two child of this root node. So you can see that at every level, so each level is being indexed by I, and it gets decreased at every level. So and at every level we have the nodes set of nodes which are denoted by ci, or maybe ci-1 or ci-2. So to give you the better understanding, we have a root node, a bigger ball which is able to cover all the points in a set of points. And then we have smaller balls, because the radius the I would be I-1, I-2, so the radius would get reduced, and we have smaller balls, but we have union of those balls to cover all the points. So you can just see in this figure on the right that we have a bigger ball ci at level I, and then inside that we have these smaller balls, that is red balls, that is I-1 level, and inside that we have these blue balls. So all of these balls, if you see, we are able to cover all these black points. So black points is our data set, we can say. So basically we have a root node, and at the leaf we can say that we have very small balls which is able to cover single point. So at leaf we have balls for each point. So that's how the cover tree is being represented. Now why do we use this cover tree? Because it is giving us the final coverings of point clouds at multiple scales. So it is giving us the hierarchical representation of point clouds, and it is actually quite faster. It has a sublinear query and insert time, so we can construct massive point clouds using this. Now, how do we represent our point clouds using cover tree? So you can just you can just consider that we have the point cloud of an aeroplane, and this bigger ball is being able to cover this point cloud. So its radius is 2 raised power I. So you can consider this is a root node of the cover tree. Now, as we go to the lower level, the radius would get halved, that is 2 raised power I minus 1, and the size of the ball would get reduced, but the number of balls would get increased in order to cover the whole point cloud. And again, as we go to the next level, so we can see that we get finer coverings, we get tighter coverings of points in a non-parametric fashion. So just consider that this ball is being able to cover the wing of the aeroplane, and this ball is being able to cover the tail of the aeroplane. So that's how we get tighter coverings of the balls. Now, considering this, we introduced two pretext tasks. So our first pretext task is the aim was to capture the interball relation between the interball relation of the balls in a cover tree for a point cloud. So this task is basically a regression task where we consider two balls at every level, and we computed center, that means the centroid of the ball, and we compute a L2 norm distance between the center of the points, and consider this value as for the regression task. Now, to give you better understanding, so you can just imagine that we have this figure, again the same representation, ball representation, and we compute the distance of these balls. So this brown is a center of the blue ball, and we again have the center of this ball here, and we compute this distance, L2 norm distance, and we actually construct these kind of pairs for our self-supervised learning. So more formally, I would say for centers in CI, that is at level I, we have SI that represents the pairs of ball, and we for each pair we assign a real value, which is just the Euclidean norm. So this was about the regression task. And so, okay, so I'm just representing this 2D representation, but we do this in three-dimensional space because we are doing it for point clouds, three-dimensional point clouds. Then our next task is a classification task, basically, where we capture the relation between a parent-child ball, that means the intra-ball relation. So where we compute the quadrant value for a child ball, and where is this child ball located in the parent ball, so in one of the four quadrants. So that's how we predict the quadrant label from 1, 2, 3, 4. And in this ball you can see that we have this shaded ball, the blue ball, and somewhere the center lies here, and this center is being presented in the third quadrant of this bigger red ball. So we consider the label as 3. So for each parent node, it has the child nodes, and in its lower level, that is the I minus 1, we have this SSI and I minus 1 of which represents the parent child ball pairs. And for each pair, we assign the integer class from one of the four quadrants. So the idea behind these two tasks were to capture the local structure using this intra-ball relation, and as well as the global structure using that inter-ball special relation between the points. So this was the idea. Now, considering these two tasks, we have a neural network architecture where we start with first the point cloud, and then we would transform it using some kind of scaling or normalization, and we have some layers. Now the main part comes here, where because we wanted ball pairs for this learning. So how do we make ball pairs? So every ball, to again remind you that every ball is a set of points, and we want to know which point belongs to which ball, because we wanted that indexing so that we can compute the ball vector, the centroid of the ball. So this we maintain a hash table here, and we actually represent this ball as a vector. And using these ball vectors, we have both of these tasks here, the task C and task R, regression classification task, and both of these tasks would be parallelly trained in the network. So once this network is trained, what we can do is we call this part as a feature extractor, because once the network is trained, we can actually extract the point embeddings, point cloud embeddings, and we can actually extract this embedding, and we can plug this into the downstream task, downstream network, which was being used for classification and segmentation. So yeah, this was the idea behind this. Now I'm moving on to the experiment. So before the actual table experiments for classification and segmentation, I would like to explain you this diagram. This is the similar kind of a figure which I have explained in like learning in the layers. So you can see that we have the visualization from input 3D space. Then we have the visualization from DGCNN with random initialization, and we have DGCNN pre-trained with our SSL method. So it's the same, it's the output of the final layer, and it's the similar kind of a diagram where we have a red point. So you can just see in the third column and the subfigure C that we have a red point, and we compute the distance from this red point to every other point. So again here yellow represents near and the dark green represents far. So we can see that in the third column, both the wings are of same color, that is yellow, and they are clearly segmented and they are far from this middle part of the aeroplane. And this is not the case with DGCNN. So you can see that some of the parts of the aeroplane are being shown in yellow, but not the, but like it's not clearly segmented. The quality is not that great. Similarly, in the second row, in the subfigure F, we can see that all the four legs of the table are being shown with the same color, are being segmented with the same color, that is dark green, which is far from this red point, which is on the top of the table. So in our case, it's quite clearly segmented, but that's not the case with DGCNN. So this was about the quality of the embeddings in the output. Then we have 3D object classification, where we consider two data sets, that's ModelNet 40 and Sydney dataset. So ModelNet 40 is basically a dense dataset and Sydney is a sparse dataset. And we have different setups because we consider few short setups. So we have 5-way, 10 short. So 10 short is 10 samples for each of these 5 classes, and 5 is the 5 class, 10 class for both the data sets. So we can see that we have these results from our experiments. So we considered this point. So these PointNet and DGCNN is quite famous work in the point cloud processing area. So we considered these network as a supervised network, and we pre-trained them with our method. So we can see that in majority of the cases, they outperform the existing unsupervised method, supervised method, and even the one which recently came as self-supervised network. So you can just consider one of the examples, like we have this Sydney 5-way 20 short, and we have our plus DGCNN, that is 90.9. And if to actually compare it with DGCNN, so DGCNN represents 76.7, and if we pre-train it with our method, it gives us 90.9. That's quite a high margin. Similarly, with ModelNet 40, we can see that our plus PointNet represent 49.15, and the original PointNet represents here 46.6. So this was about the classification. Now we also have results from part segmentation, where we consider this ShapeNet dataset and we compute the mean intersection over union. So for segmentation, we wanted the overlap of the parts in the output. It's not the accuracy, but the overlap. So in this one, the ShapeNet has 16 categories, and as I said that we need label for each point in the point cloud, so we need to compute it for each of these 16 categories. So this is the result. Even in this case also, we can we analyze that we outperform. And for example, you can see that PointNet here is 41.78 and our plus PointNet is 49.58. So that was quite good. Then we again have here 33.9 for PointNet, and we have 42.5 for our plus PointNet. So this was the result. To give you the better understanding for part segmentation, we have this visualization where the first column is DGCNN output, the second is DGCNN pre-trained with the latest self-supervised before our method, and the third column is DGCNN pre-trained with our SSL method. So in the third column, you can see that both the earbuds are clearly segmented, and headband is also clearly segmented. And similarly, we have the guitar. So all the 3 parts of the guitar are clearly segmented, but that's not the case with even DGCNN and even with Voxel SSL plus DGCNN. So yeah, that was about the results. Now to summarize this presentation, so I would say we are the first to introduce this self-supervised pre-training method on point clouds in the few short learning setup. We proposed the use of a cover tree, which represented a point cloud in a hierarchical multi-scale fashion. And then we generate self-supervised class label, and we encode this hierarchical decomposition of a cover tree into our two self-supervised tasks. We propose the architecture for our self-supervised learning task, and we finally evaluate this self-supervised few-shot learning model on classification and segmentation task. And we outperform all the supervised, unsupervised, and even self-supervised methods. So yeah, that was about it. Thank you. Please ask questions.
That was a very detailed talk indeed. So while we are open to questions. So meanwhile, last week on Twitter, I got a suggestion for Computer Vision Talks that we should try to include the story of the paper as well. So now I'm going to ask you some questions about that. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
first one would be, how did you get started on this problem? What inspired you, or how did you get the clue to it?
Okay. So okay, so it, I think it has some connection with like my previous work. So I have generally worked on graphs, like you can say graph neural networks, graph attention networks, and or maybe even before that also I have worked on graphs and machine learning. So so graph is also an irregular data. It's not grid, so it's not images or it's not text. So while I was working on graphs, I was also actually exploring the point clouds, like three-dimensional correspondence problem, or maybe 3D modeling or 3D shape analysis or something like that. So I wanted to work on point cloud. So that's how I landed up onto the point cloud. I would say the topic, the only the point cloud. Now in the point cloud there is already so much of work. So how to, like, what to do in that? So actually I read so many papers, methods, everything I read, and I was thinking like how to proceed, like what to introduce in this, because there are already so many papers are there. So then I was actually also exploring few short learning, I would say, first. So I did not see single paper on point clouds in few short learning. So first idea came to my mind was there is no few short on point clouds. And because right now if you'll see, the machine learning, the field has moved to like self-supervised or semi-supervised or few shots, so that we don't need so much of labeled data, or we need only few samples to learn. So some things are going on which are quite I would say evolving right now. And when I even searched for is there any self-supervised paper, so there was one paper I found. So that was the thing, like I then I got the idea, okay, I can do self-supervised or I can do few shot, but how to do that? So the thing is, because I have generally worked on graphs or maybe some kind of, I would say, kind of geometrical structure, I have mostly worked on the things which would capture some kind of a structural property, some kind of structure in the data. So that's why we wanted some kind of this representation, like hierarchical representation from cover tree, because in my previous papers I have worked on higher order structure, some kind of these things where we capture higher order structure and not only the points. So that's where this hierarchical representation, we got to know that okay, we can use some kind of this representation, and but we again did not know how to do that. Then this cover tree and all, we already knew that there are algorithms for this, for space partitioning. So we tried out like cover tree. So you can just see that we connect the dots when we work on a problem. We start with a very vague thing initially, that okay, this is the problem, but how to proceed. So we have to connect the dots, we have to work along the way, and then we have to do some kind of experiments, a lot of experiments, I would say. Because before moving on to the solution, we have to actually run the experiments and to see like how does these existing methods work, like how are they getting better performance. So we have to first work with, play with the existing codes, like the DGCNN I was saying, like PointNet, all of these. And then we have to get some kind of an idea. So because I have worked on geometrical aspects of this, so that's how I got the idea for this.
Right. Okay, so because like we have been talking about so many things that were new to you, so can you count on finger how many skills or topics you had to learn from scratch when you were doing the paper?
So skills, so to be honest, I cannot list all of them because I have been working on like not on this paper, but I have worked on quite a few papers before this.
Right.
So I cannot say like if so I can say that if you are a beginner, if anyone is a beginner who wants to work on a paper, so there are some kind of there is some kind of a sequence, I would say. First, first you have to pick a paper. So you can just actually read some kind of papers which you have to pick anyway. Maybe using
Hmm.
some while going through the titles or maybe through the abstract. Once you pick that, what you have to do is you have to maybe first or you play with their code. You have to first find like if I know this is able to consider that also, right? So when we run some kind of a the existing code, the thing is we have to think of a new problem, like in images. So maybe because most of you would be familiar with the images. So in images there are problems like occlusions. Some parts are not visible in the image and there are quite a few challenges. So you have to come up with some kind of a problem which this existing work is not able to handle. So once you find out, okay, this is the problem with this method, now you have to improve. Because many of the times I've seen that people cannot even think about what is the problem in the paper, what is the problem in the existing idea. Like when so it's not only the aim to get the paper, but to improve. But what to improve? Like this is the challenge. Now I have to get the solution for this challenge.
So, but yeah, sorry to put in
Yeah.
what I have found in my own case, that if I'm reading many papers, only then I'm able to. When I'm reading a new paper, only then I'm able to get like a strike with an idea that okay, fine. If this one is not covering edge cases, we can change this and include that. But if someone is starting from scratch, I guess yeah, that is what you mean. To develop an intuition that what is the problem with the work would be tough
Right.
initially.
Yeah. So when you read the paper, you get some kind of idea, but I think it's not very clear until you code it up or you do some kind of experiments on this. So from my experience, I would say that if we get some kind of an idea, okay, this is the paper, this is the problem, but actually to find out it should work in practice, right? So we have to work on the maybe code, and one more thing is like when we work with our supervisors, so they can also give us the idea. But even my supervisor says that you are the one who should get the intuition because you are the one working on the code, working with the experience. Because when I change some kind of a thing in the code, the results are quite different. So how is that happening in the code? So all of these things, so it's like connection between the theory and the practice. So you have to connect all of these, like what is mentioned in the paper, it should be work in the experiments also. Yeah.
The next question would be, how did your colleagues or advisor help you to shape it?
Okay. So to be honest, the group which I have worked in, it's quite small right now. So it's mostly either me, my supervisor, or maybe one or two more students from, even I would say, undergrad students. So it's like the help, we definitely get the help if we know that this person knows the things better. Maybe if the area is common, like if there is someone who has already worked on point cloud, so I can actually get the help. I can actually get the idea, like if do you know that why is this working or why is that not working. But we can also get some kind of idea with respect to the deep learning, because nowadays everyone is learning the models in the deep learning scenario. So we can actually get the help from the colleagues if there is some kind of the intersection even with the deep learning or with the area. So yeah, so with the I think with the with me, I think one student was there in our group. he did not work on point clouds and all, so but he had the idea for deep learning. So when we used to do brainstorming session for the papers, we can actually get the help, like how does, so can we use transformer in this, for example. I'm just saying that uh, because transformer is being used quite a lot now. So can we use this? So all of these kind of things, I think these things we get from the colleagues or the friends with whom we discuss the papers.
Right. So, since like the paper got accepted at NeurIPS, did you try to push it anywhere else before, or was it the first place you put it?
This was the first. This was the first.
Okay. And do you remember any of the reviews comments?
So I think the idea was so I think yeah, so I would say most of the reviews were like positive because this was a new concept. The novelty was high in this, but there was one thing I think they were concerned about was like if we remove few short learning, are you still able to just you are just improving over few short? So the answer was yes, we did experiments even without few short, and we were actually improving even without few short. But the thing is, without few short there is already a good result. Like the I think the performance on ModelNet or something is like 90 to 192. So it's already, so there is not much scope to improve upon that. But yeah, we were actually, our result was even better in that case, but not with high margin because there was not much scope. But yeah, we tried even without FSL, so it was doing good. But because in self-supervised learning, the idea is if we learn with the unlabeled data, so much of unlabeled data in the pre-trained model, and then we use less data, less labeled data in the downstream. So our self-supervised learning was complementing the few short learning.
Right.
So that's why we were getting good results in this. So yeah, so that was the comments from the reviewer. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I guess Nikhil has some questions. Nikhil, can you please go ahead?
Okay.
Hi, Charu. Yeah, from the
Hi.
implementation perspective, so the cover tree is implemented as a custom layer, or is it is implemented in the forward pass of the network, in the forward function?
Okay, so the thing is, we do not use cover tree inside the layers. It's the pre-processing. So the thing is, we need to generate the self-supervised labels before the training. So it's the bunch of pre-processing where in using the cover tree algorithm, we have to construct these ball pairs, and we use these pre-processed data into the network. It's not in the layers.
And also, when you're comparing with previous approaches, do you implement these
Yes.
approaches in beforehand when you're comparing, or after you design your method, you start implementing this previous existing methods?
Okay, like existing. Okay, so I would say I had worked on like before implementing my method, because I, like I said, when we work on some problem, so we have to work on some maybe some kind of popular paper or some existing paper. So I was already working on point net and easy that are the I was working on these to see like how are they work inside the layers. So there any of the was but they were not difficult. Like once they give you some
Charu, I guess like there's some network issue from your end. We could not hear the answer for this question from the start. Can you repeat it?
Okay.
Yeah, you
It's
can maybe stop sharing. It would be
fine
better.
now. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Yeah, so mostly I have coded later, but maybe 2, 3 methods I would say I was already working on those initially.
Great. So there's a question in the chat box as well. Prajwal is asking, uh, he's appreciating the work and he's asking that can we use it for calculating freshest point this cloud distance, because the method you proposed enhance the embedding space learning.
Okay, so Freshed, I have read about it before maybe, but I don't actually remember. I think it's to compare the point cloud. I'm not sure. Uh, because the method you okay, he says yes. Yes. So Freshed point cloud because the method you propose enhancing. Uh, okay, so the thing is, if we want to compare the point clouds, I think okay, we can maybe use this in loss function, because if we want to make two similar point clouds close to each other, we can use this distance maybe as a regularizer or maybe in the loss function of the network, I would say. Yeah, I think maybe in the loss function we can use, because I could not think of any other place where we can use this function, this distance. I think this can help making point clouds which are similar close to each other. Yeah, I think yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
How?
so
Yeah.
like, do you want to continue or that's it?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
fine.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
if there are
Prajwal
any
says
questions,
transfer.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, 1 second.
Sure.
Hi, Charu.
Hi.
I was having a doubt with the network. I mean, when you said we were using the points to ball mapping, I mean, the figure which you showed,
Yeah.
and then at the end, you said we are sending it to a classification or segmentation network, correct?
Yeah.
Uh, so, I mean, your in one of the results that you presented, you showed your method plus point net, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of what I have read and what I remember about PointNet, PointNet directly takes the point cloud as an input, right?
Right.
So, I mean, so is your point cloud being fed with those balls centers which you've shown in the image, or is it, I mean, like, how is the input going into the PointNet?
Okay. So like I think if you remember, I've represented the network, and in that, so first we learn this self-supervised network, right, with this balls and point clouds.
Right,
Now, after we get this learned network, so there was a part which I was showing in the slides that we call this part as a feature extractor, right?
right,
So you can just imagine that in the self-supervised network, we maybe get the output of the point clouds, maybe from some kind of a middle layer, where we
okay,
can get the embeddings for each point. Like the original point cloud is n by 3, right, 3-dimensional space. So we will get some kind of n by d, and
right,
this we feed it to the point net or DGCNN or any supervised network. So this
okay,
was from one of the layers in the middle, yeah, middle part of the network.
okay, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Any more questions?
Hi, Charu.
Hi.
I had actually one question. It's not about the paper, although it's an excellent work from your side. I had a doubt about how to enhance our writing skills. Like I'm currently working on a paper right now, and
Okay.
the main problem I'm facing is how to put your ideas into the paper. So any tips for that?
Okay. Yeah, so the I would say, so I cannot just I cannot, like I said before, like I cannot just say that you should do and you will get a paper. So it's actually kind of a process in which you learn. Even I would say I have been into PhD for like more than 4 years now. So I have also learned this, but like I said, like you have to first find out the problem. Like I was saying that, if you want to make a point cloud, you have to first pick these. Not know this, like when we read a paper, we cannot even point out like this is the problem in this paper, or this method cannot handle. So once you get this, then you have to find out the way. So if you already have idea, so are you asking me like you already have idea but how to deliver it, or that one, or
Yeah.
to get the idea, how to get the idea?
Yeah, actually, I have an idea. I've worked on it, and then I have to put this idea into the paper. Like when I basically my supervisor is guiding me to the work, and when I see basically uh, he has even put his input into the paper. So the way he writes and the way I write is completely
Okay,
different.
yeah.
So
So writing skills would improve with time, I would say. But the thing is, okay. So in my most of my papers, so I don't know how generally people do, but what I did in all of my papers was, first we have to get the results, right? Like
yeah,
we need to know that this improving. Now while writing the paper, I used to always write the experiment section first. So
okay,
you can actually start even with the methods, but because we cannot start writing the paper without getting results, right? We because we don't know whether we are improving or not. So we have we have done our groundwork always. Like we know, okay, this is the existing work, this is the comparison and everything. But while writing, I have mostly written the experiment section first. And how would you design the experiment section? You have to do some standard experiments, definitely, which every paper has done. Otherwise reviewers will definitely say that, okay, this is the standard thing which you haven't done, right? Once you do this, you have to think of some new experiments, maybe some kind of ablation study, or some kind of robustness of the wood. All of these you can actually think of. So don't just go with the standard experiments, I would say. Think about other methods also. So when you introduce new experiment, that would be impressive, because that's a new thing, right? So once you have some kind of the rough draft of the experiments, I'm not saying finish everything before writing the other parts. Like I'm not saying the full experiment section, but at least the rough draft of the experiment section you can add later on, like some of the experiments. After that, we have like on the side I have written related work, and on the side I have written our method, like starting from what is the basic, the what is the this preliminary, and then our method, and maybe the background for our method. So that's how I have proceeded every time. And yeah, so once you get the experiments, you have our method, and then usually I have written abstract and introduction in the end. So
okay,
you can actually go with your way, but I am just sharing my experience. So and then conclusion, anyway in the end we can write, but mostly abstract and introduction in the end. But before all of these, you have to actually get the R method and experiments, because introduction is actually the overview of your method, experiments, and even the background.
yeah,
Because in introduction you have to write, okay, this is the application, this is the problem. So introduction is the combination of all. So you cannot actually write introduction in which everything is covered. So you must be knowing that it's difficult to write in a shortest way, right?
yeah.
It's easier to explain in a longer way. So first write the longer part, so that you can actually elaborate, and then make it concise and make it short into the introduction.
I
So
see.
Right.
that you can do, yeah. And
And
its shorter part is abstract.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
So that's all.
Like there are some
and
papers that are so easy to read, they make a rhythm and you just go on reading. You just don't like the Cornwall paper, and I've just read it in one go. It was so good, but sometimes it is hard to understand. So I guess like I have just started writing stuff, so I keep asking different people, are you able to understand, what are you understanding? Then I'm comparing, what am I intending, what is the other person understanding, then I change.
Yeah, right. When you write a paper, you just have to think of a person who doesn't know anything about it. It should be very easy to understand. So the target audience you have to think about.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And like sometimes when two different people are writing the same paper, one would write the author want to propose, and the other one
Yeah.
was will be writing we are doing this, and then
Yeah.
you're reading the paper in a compiled way, and you just figure out, oh no.
Yeah, right. So we have usually, like even now, we always use we.
Right,
It's like, yeah.
right. Great. Lots of formal and informal questions. Any more questions from anyone? Okay, great. So yeah, one thing. How much time did it took for you to experiment with all the stuff? What were the machines? How much time the training took? When did you decided that the results were enough? More on the experimentation part. Can you put some light on that before we end?
Yeah. So usually when you start making a paper and like you have to come up with a good novelty in that. So I think the paper would take time. So like I haven't made any of the paper in like 1 or 2 months. So mostly I have always worked in advance. So it's mostly like I think uh, I have taken uh, at least 5 6 months, at least 5 6 months. And first I have to figure out, because we have to start with the existing work, and read and play with them, and then come up with a solution and then perform. So once we get the results, we have to ensure that we are getting in all of these experiments. So I have mostly completed all the experiments beforehand, but yeah, definitely there would be some experiments which would be run till last. So it's always there. But once I have the rough draft, usually I think my estimation is, once I have the initial results that okay, our model is improving, I would say in all of my papers I have mostly completed the paper writing and the experiments maybe in, I would say, 1.5 months, something like that, maybe somewhere between 1 to 2 months, because it takes time. Yeah.
Mhm.
So one to
I
two
guess
months yeah.
that's it from me.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I guess not. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charu, for such a detailed and
Yeah.
in-depth explanation. Also, for the ones asking in the messages, the code is available on Charu's GitHub. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Nikhil has shared the link to the repository as well. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We would like to end it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you,
Bye.
Charu.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
we look forward to more awesome work from you.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Bye.